tomorrow. Daddy's taking us to the zoo tomorrow, and we can stay all day. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. How about you, you, you? You can come too, too, too. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. See the elephant with the long trunk swinging, great big ears, long trunk swinging, sniffing up peanuts with the long trunk swinging, and we can stay all day. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. How about you, you, you? You can come too, too, too. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. See the monkeys all scratch, scratch, scratching, jumping all around, scratch, scratch, scratching, hanging by their long tails, scratch, scratch, scratching. We can stay all day. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. How about you, you, you? You can come too, too, too. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. Big black bear will huff, huff, puff, and coat's too heavy, he's huff, huff, puff. Don't get too near the huff, huff, puff, or you won't stay all day. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. How about you, you, you? You can come too, too, too. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. Seals in the pool all honk, honk, honking, catching fish, honk, honk, honking, little seals, honk, honk, honking, and we can stay all day. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. How about you, you, you? You can come too, too, too. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. We stayed all day, and I'm getting sleepy, sitting in the car, getting sleep, sleep, sleepy. Home already, and I sleep, sleep, sleepy, and we have stayed all day. We've been to the zoo, zoo, zoo. So have you, you, you? You came too, too, too. We've been to the zoo, zoo, zoo. Mama's taking us to the zoo tomorrow, zoo, tomorrow, zoo, tomorrow. Mama's taking us to the zoo tomorrow, and we can stay all day. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. How about you, you, you? You can come too, too, too. We're going to the zoo, zoo, zoo. When I was just a wee little lass, full of health and joy, my father homeward came one night and gave to me a toy. A wonder to behold it was, with many colours bright, and the moment I laid eyes on it, it became my heart's delight. It went whoosh when it moves, and when it stopped, and when it stood still. I never knew just what it was, and I guess I never will. The first time that I picked it up, I had a big surprise, for right on its bottom were two big buttons that looked like big green eyes. I first pushed one and then the other, and then I twisted its lid, and when I set it down again, this is what it did. It went whoosh when it moves, and when it stopped, and when it stood still. I never knew just what it was, and I guess I never will. Well, I first marched left, and then marched right, and then marched under a chair, and when I looked where it had gone, it wasn't even there. I started to sob, and my daddy laughed, for he knew that I would find, when I turned around, my marvelous toy chugging from behind. It went whoosh when it moves, and when it stopped, and when it stood still. I never knew just what it was, and I guess I never will. Well, the years have gone by too quickly, it seems. I have my own little boy, and yesterday I gave to him my marvelous little toy. His eyes nearly popped right out of his head, and he gave a squeal of glee. Neither one of us knows just what it is, but he loves it just like me. It still goes moves them when it stopped, when it stood still. I never knew just what it was, and I guess I never will. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. My roof's got a hole in it and I might drown. Oh yes, my roof's got a hole in it and I might drown. There was a crooked man and he had a crooked smile, had a crooked sixpence and he walked a crooked mile, had a crooked cat and he had a crooked mouse. They all lived together in a crooked little house. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. My roof's got a hole in it and I might drown. Oh yes, my roof's got a hole in it and I might drown. The crooked little man and his crooked little smile took his crooked sixpence and he walked a crooked mile, brought her crooked nails and some crooked little bat, tried to fix his roof with a rat-a-tat-tat-tat. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. My roof's got a hole in it and I might drown. Oh yes, my roof's got a hole in it and I might drown. Now the crooked little man and his crooked cat and mouse all lived together in a crooked little house. Has a crooked door with a crooked little latch, had a crooked roof with a crooked little patch. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. Ah-ha, oh no, don't let the rain come down. My roof's got a hole in it and I might drown. Oh yes, my roof's got a hole in it and I might drown.
Alice was getting very tired of sitting by her sister and having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeked into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures in it, and what use was a book without pictures, thought Alice. Lying there in the sun, it was no wonder Alice felt a little sleepy, and she couldn't decide whether to make a daisy chain or not, when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran by. Well, that wasn't so strange. Nor did Alice think it odd when she heard the rabbit say to itself, oh dear, I shall be late." But when the rabbit actually took a watch out of its waistcoat and looked at it, then hurried on, Alice stood up, for it crossed her mind that she had never seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat or a watch, so she ran after it, and was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole under the hedge. Straight away Alice followed, never stopping to think of how she was to get out again. The rabbit hole was just like a long tunnel, then suddenly it dipped, and Alice found herself falling down a very deep well. She wasn't sure if the well was very deep, or if she was just falling slowly, for she had plenty of time to look around her as she went down. She noticed that the sides of the well were filled with cupboards and bookshelves, and there were some maps and pictures hanging on pegs as well. Down, down, down would she never stop falling. "I wonder how far and how many miles I've fallen," thought Alice. Still she kept falling, and because there was nothing else to do, she began talking to herself. At last the fall was over. She wasn't a bit hurt, and although it was dark, she could just see the white rabbit hurrying down a long passage. Away went Alice, and she heard the rabbit saying, "Oh, my ears and whiskers, how late it's getting." She was close behind it when she turned a corner, but the rabbit was no longer to be seen. By now Alice was in a long, low hall with rows of lamps hanging from the roof. There were doors all around, but they were locked, and Alice wondered how she was going to get out. On a table by one of the doors was a golden key, so around the hall she went. Strange, it didn't fit any of the doors. Just a minute, though. Here was a low curtain she had missed before, and behind it a little door only 15 inches high, and yes, the key fitted this door. But Alice couldn't even get her head through the door. Oh, what was she going to do? She went back to the table to make sure there were no other keys, and this time she found a little bottle. "Drink me," said the words on the label. Oh, that was all very well, but what if it was poison? However, the label would have said so. Alice tasted it, and it was so nice she drank it all. "What a funny feeling," thought Alice. "I'm getting smaller." Now she was only 10 inches tall, but what a nuisance. She'd left the key on the table, and she was too short to reach it. This was too much, and Alice sat down and cried. "What's the point of crying?" she thought. "That's not going to get me out of here." Soon her eye fell on a little glass box lying under the table. She opened it and found a small cake with the words "Eat me" on it. "Well, I'll eat it," thought Alice, "and if I grow larger, I'll be able to reach the key, and if I grow smaller, then I can creep under the door, so either way I'll get into the garden." She started eating the cake, and very soon had finished it all. Goodness gracious, yes, she was getting taller, and after a few minutes her head hit against the roof, so she was now rather more than 9 foot high. Poor Alice! All she wanted was to find the White Rabbit. And there he was, suddenly coming down the passage, still muttering to himself. As he came near, she began in a small voice, "If you please, sir." Oh, the rabbit got such a fright he dropped his white kid gloves and the fan and scurried away. Bother, thought Alice. It was getting so hot, and she picked up the fan to cool herself with it. How queer everything is today. And again she started talking to herself. As she looked down at her hands, she was just surprised to see she had put one of Rabbit's gloves on. She must be growing smaller to have done that. She got up and went to the table to measure herself. She must be about 2 foot high and still shrinking. The fan she was holding was the cause of it, and quickly she dropped it. Oh, that was a narrow escape, or she may even have disappeared completely. Back to the little door she went, but it was shut again. And where was the golden key? Yes, on the table. With that, her foot slipped, and splash! She was up to her chin in salt water. At first she thought she was in the sea, but then realized she was in a pool of her own tears from when she had been crying. She managed to swim out, and while she was wondering what to do next, White Rabbit came trotting slowly back again. The Duchess, oh, my twitching whiskers! She'll have my head chopped off. Where did I drop them? Oh, dear!" The rabbit was saying to himself. Alice immediately guessed he was looking for the fan and white kid gloves, and she started hunting for them, but they were nowhere to be seen. Very soon Rabbit noticed her and called in an angry tone, "Why, Marianne, what are you doing out here? Run home at once and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan." Alice was so frightened she ran off in the direction Rabbit pointed. She realized Rabbit had mistaken her for his housekeeper. All the same, she'd better take him his gloves and fan if she could find them. This wasn't easy, and you've no idea the things that happened to her and all the different animals she met. There was the puppy, the caterpillar, a pigeon, the pigs, and after some time she came to a little house. While she was standing staring at it, a fish came running out of the wood and knocked loudly on the door. The door was opened by a frog, all dressed up as a footman. Curiouser and curiouser, thought Alice. Eventually, she decided to go in herself. Quietly she opened the door. This led right into a large kitchen, which was full of smoke, and in the middle, sitting on a 3-legged stool, was the Duchess, nursing a baby. She was very rough with the baby, and very rude when she spoke to cook and the others in the kitchen. Then she said to Alice, "Here, you nurse it for a bit," throwing the baby to Alice. "I must go and get ready to play croquet with the Queen." Alice managed to catch the baby and thought to herself that if she didn't take it away, they'd be sure to kill it. The baby kept grunting, and Alice was just beginning to think what she would do with this creature when it gave a very loud grunt, and Alice, to her great surprise, discovered she was indeed carrying a pig. Putting it down on the ground, she watched it trot away into the wood. So Alice walked on, and she hadn't gone much further before she came in sight of the house of the March Hare. Under a tree there was a table set, and the March Hare and the Hatter were having tea. A dormouse was sitting between them fast asleep. The table was very large, but the three were all crowded together at one corner. "No room, no room!" they cried out when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice, and sat down in a large armchair. "Have some wine?" said the March Hare. "I don't see any," said Alice, looking around. "There isn't any," said the March Hare. "Then that wasn't very nice of you to offer it," said Alice. "It wasn't very nice of you to sit down without being invited," said the March Hare, and so it went on, remarks being passed back and forth. It was the maddest tea party she had ever been to. When she left, they didn't even notice her going, and once more she found herself in the long hall. I forgot to tell you she had found a mushroom somewhere during her travels, and if she nibbled this, it made her shrink. So after taking the golden key from the table, she nibbled on the mushroom, and then at last went through the little door into a most beautiful garden. She saw 3 gardeners dressed as playing cards, busily painting the roses red, and heard them saying, "Look out, 5, don't go splashing me with paint." "I couldn't help it," said 5. "7 jogged my elbow." To which 7 said, "That's right, 5, always blame someone else." Timidly, Alice asked them why they were painting the roses, and the gardeners told her it was because they were supposed to be red, but they had put a white one in by mistake, and if the Queen found out, she would chop off their heads, so they were painting them red. With that, there was the sound of many footsteps. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. Next, the 10 courtiers, all covered with diamonds, and they walked 2 by 2. The royal children followed, decorated with hearts, and the guests, mostly kings and queens, had among them White Rabbit. Still they came, the Knave of Hearts carrying the king's crown on a crimson velvet cushion, and last of all came the King and Queen of Hearts. When the procession came opposite Alice, they all stopped and looked at her. "Who's this?" said the Queen to the Knave of Hearts. He just smiled. "Idiot," said the Queen, and turning to Alice she went on, "What's your name, child?" "My name's Alice, so please your Majesty," said Alice very politely, but she thought to herself, "Why, they're only a pack of cards. There's no need to be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the Queen, pointing to the 3 gardeners who were lying by the rose tree. "How should I know?" said Alice. "It's no business of mine." The Queen turned crimson with rage and screamed, "Off with her head! Off!" "Nonsense," said Alice. "Consider, my dear, she's only a child," said the King. The Queen turned away and told the 3 gardeners to get up. "What have you been doing?" she said to them. They started to tell her, but before they could finish, the Queen said, "Off with their heads!" And the procession moved on. Alice turned to the 3 gardeners and quickly put them into a large flower pot that stood near. The 3 soldiers wandered about looking for them, and then marched off after the others. The Queen decided it was time to play croquet. It was the oddest game of croquet Alice had ever seen. The croquet balls were live hedgehogs, and the mallets were live flamingos. The soldiers had to double themselves up and stand on their hands and feet to make the arches. Everyone played at once, without waiting for turns, and the soldiers kept walking off and making arches somewhere else on the ground. Alice began to feel very uneasy, and wondered how she could escape when she saw the Duchess, who was in a much better temper than last time. While they were talking, the Queen called for the Mock Turtle. Mock Turtle? What next? So she met the Mock Turtle and the Gryphon, and while all this was going on, the Queen, who was still cross, said it was time for the trial to begin. What trial? The trial to find out who stole the tarts. Remember, the Queen of Hearts who made some tarts? This was all too much for Alice, but worse was to come, as Alice was called to give evidence, and she was very nervous. They asked her some very odd questions, until in the finish Alice said, "Oh, this is all nonsense." "Hold your tongue," said the Queen. "I won't," said Alice. "Off with her head," shouted the Queen. "Who cares for you? You're nothing but a pack of cards," Alice said. At that the whole pack of cards rose up into the air and came flying down upon her. She gave a little scream and tried to beat them off, and she found herself lying on the back, with her head in the lap of her sister, who was gently brushing away some dead leaves that had fluttered down from the trees. "Wake up, Alice," said her sister. "What a long sleep you've had." "Oh, I've had such a curious dream," she said, and began to tell her sister all that she could remember of her strange adventures in Wonderland. One day, when she had children of her own, she thought it would make a wonderful story. Alice in Wonderland. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. Mamma, in her kerchief and father his cap, had just settled down for a long winter nap, when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, father sprang from his bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window he flew like a flash, tore open the shutters, and threw up the sash. The moon, on the breast of the new-fallen snow, gave a lustre of midday to objects below, when what to his wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, he knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and Nick whistled and shouted and called them by name. "Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all." As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling father heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As he drew in his head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all covered with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his sack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his mouth, and the smoke, it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face, and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and father laughed when he saw him in spite of himself. A wink of Nick's eye and a twist of his head gave father to know he had nothing to dread. St. Nick spoke no words, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. Father heard him exclaim, as he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." There were once 4 little rabbits, and they were called Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. The 4 little rabbits lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big pine tree. One morning, old Mrs. Rabbit said, "Now, my dears, you can go into the fields or down the lane, but whatever you do, don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had a nasty accident there, and he ended up in one of Mrs. McGregor's rabbit pies. So run along and don't get into any mischief. I'm going out." Old Mrs. Rabbit then took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Meanwhile, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was a very naughty rabbit, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and carefully squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. After all that, he was feeling rather sick, so he went to look for some parsley. However, as he went round the end of a cucumber frame, who should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was down on his hands and knees planting out some young cabbages, but he jumped up and quickly ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" By now, Peter was most dreadfully frightened, and he rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way to the gate. As he was scampering along, he lost one of his shoes among the cabbages, and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran even faster on his 4 legs, and I think he just might have got away altogether if he hadn't unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught up by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, and it was quite new. Peter decided then that he was lost, and he began to cry. But his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. With that, Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop over the top of Peter. But Peter managed to wriggle out just in time, although he left his jacket behind. He rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a watering can. It would have been the ideal thing to hide in if it hadn't had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps even hidden underneath a flower pot. So he began to turn them over carefully, looking under each one. Presently, Peter sneezed. Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and he tried to put his foot on Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 pot plants as he went. The window, of course, was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter, so he went back to his work. At last, Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, nor did he have the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that watering can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lip, 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 not very fast, and looking all round. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large mouthful she couldn't answer. She only shook her head at him, and with that Peter began to cry. Presently he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. He came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his watering cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very still, though now and then the tip of her tail twitched backwards and forwards. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her, as he had heard about cats from his cousin Benjamin Bunny. So he went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly he heard the noise of a hoe. It was quite close to him. Peter scampered underneath the bushes, but nothing happened. So out he came and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing the onions. He had his back to Peter, but beyond him was the gate. Very quietly, Peter got down off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go, straight along a path behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter didn't care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor made a scarecrow with the little blue jacket and the shoes. This was to frighten the blackbirds away from the garden. Meanwhile, Peter never stopped running or even looked behind him until he got home to the big pine tree. He was so tired that he flopped down on the soft sand floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother, who was busy cooking, wondered what on earth he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am sorry to say that Peter wasn't very well during the night. His mother put him to bed, made some chamomile tea, and she gave him a dose. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime, she said. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread, milk, and blackberries for their supper. Near a big forest there lived a poor woodcutter and his wife. She was the stepmother to the woodcutter's 2 children, Hansel and Gretel. They were so poor there was not enough bread for them to eat. The woodcutter would lie awake at night worrying about how he could find food for his family. One night, his wife, who was a hard woman, said, "Early tomorrow morning we'll lead them far into the forest, give them a slice of bread each, and leave them to get on as best they can." Their father felt he couldn't do that, as the wild beasts might tear them apart. The wife went on and on, until her husband agreed to do it. The 2 children, who had not gone to sleep because they were so hungry, overheard what their stepmother said. "Don't cry, Gretel," said Hansel. "I'll help you." And when the parents had gone to sleep, Hansel crept out of the house and filled his pockets with as many little white pebbles as he could. Early the next morning, the stepmother woke the children and told them they were all going into the forest to chop wood. She gave them each a slice of bread and told them to keep it for later, as there wouldn't be any more, and they set out. As they went along, Hansel would drop a pebble every now and then, so they could find their way home. When they were in the forest, their father lit a big fire for them, and they were told to stay there and have a sleep. Their stepmother said they would come for them after they had chopped enough wood. Hansel and Gretel did as they were told. They ate their bread and then went to sleep. It was dark when they awoke, and Gretel began to cry. "Don't worry," said Hansel. "When the moon comes out, we'll follow my pebbles home." And sure enough, the pebbles shone as white, and they followed them home. When at last they reached the cottage, their father was so glad to see them, but their stepmother wasn't. Soon afterwards, there was even less bread for them to eat than before, and their stepmother decided to try her plan again. This time she made sure Hansel had no pebbles, and early the next morning off they went again. They each had their slice of bread, and when Hansel kept lagging behind, his father told him to hurry up. "I am only looking back to say goodbye to my little white birds sitting on the roof," said Hansel. His stepmother told him not to be so stupid, but every time Hansel dropped behind, he threw a crumb of his bread on the ground. This time they went far deeper into the forest. Their father built a large fire, and their stepmother told them they had fetched them that evening. Gretel shared her bread with Hansel, and then they slept for a little while. Once again, after they woke up, they waited for the moon to shine so they could follow the breadcrumbs home. This time, though, the birds had eaten all the crumbs, and the children were really lost. They wandered on, and Hansel kept telling Gretel they'd soon find the right way and not to worry. After 2 days of walking, they were still deep in the forest. They'd eaten berries off the bushes and slept at night under a tree. On the 3rd morning, they came in sight of a little cottage, and when the children came close to it, they could see it was made of gingerbread and candy. "We'll have a feast," said Hansel. "Let's have a piece of the roof first." So they sat down and started to eat. Presently, "Munching, crunching, munching, who's eating my house?" said a voice. "The wind, only the wind," replied the children, and went on eating. Suddenly the door opened, and there stood a strange-looking old woman. She was actually a witch, but the children didn't know this, so when she spoke kindly to them and invited them inside, they thanked her and went in. After she'd given them a lovely meal of milk and cakes, apples and raisins, she put them to bed, and they went off to sleep, thinking how lucky they were. The witch chuckled to herself. She was a wicked old woman, because she had made her house of nice things to eat, just to tempt little children, and when she had caught them, she cooked them and ate them. Next morning, after the children got up, the witch took Hansel out and shut him in a cage all by himself. When Hansel asked her what she was doing, she just ignored him and told Gretel to hurry up and boil some water so she could cook something good for Hansel to eat. Oh, she'd have to fatten him up a little before she ate him. Poor Gretel was very upset and cried bitterly, but she had to do as she was told. Each meal the witch took it out to the cage, unlocked the padlock on the door with one of the keys hanging on a cord round her waist. Gretel knew there was no hope of taking them and letting her brother out. She wished they'd never found the house. At least if they'd stayed in the forest they wouldn't have been eaten by a wicked old witch. Every morning the witch would ask Hansel to stick out his finger so she could see if he was getting fat. Hansel knew that if she thought he was fat, she'd eat him. So he used to stretch out a chicken bone he had kept, and the old witch, having bad eyesight, thought the bone was his finger. After several weeks of this, the witch lost her temper and decided that, fat or thin, she'd cook Hansel. She told Gretel to fetch some water for the pot, but first she'd bake some bread, and would Gretel creep inside the oven and see if it was hot enough. She had guessed the witch wanted to cook her at the same time, and that she meant to shut Gretel in the oven. "How shall I get in the oven?" asked Gretel. "You silly goose," said the witch, "it's plenty big enough." And she knelt down in front of the oven to show Gretel how. Quickly Gretel pushed the witch in and shut the oven door. "Hansel, Hansel, we're saved!" she cried as she ran out and opened the cage. They danced for joy and fell into each other's arms. Before they left the witch's house, they went round and gathered some of her treasures, and then set out for home. They walked and walked, not really knowing the way. But soon they saw trees and paths they recognized, and they started running. At last they saw their father's cottage, and rushing inside, they threw themselves in his arms. Their stepmother had died, and he had not had a single happy moment since he had left the children in the forest. He was so happy to see them again. Of course, with the witch's treasure to buy food and clothes with, they were never hungry again, and they all lived happily together. It was summertime, and out in the country the corn was growing, the oats were green, the farmers had made their haystacks, and the young animals were running around. Everything was very busy, and it was lovely in the country at this time of the year. Beside one of the large meadows, bathed in sunshine, stood an old country house. It was surrounded by deep streams, with tall trees and bushes growing all around. Down by one of the streams, a duck was sitting on her nest, hatching out the little ducklings. Oh, it was such a tiring business, this waiting, as very few friends came to visit her, because they were too busy swimming about in the streams. At last the eggs did crack, and out popped the ducklings, one after the other. "Quack, quack," said Mother Duck.
"What a big place the world is,"
said her babies. "Do you think this is the whole world?" said Mother Duck. "It stretches way beyond the other side of the garden, but I haven't been as far as that. Are you all here? No, that's not right. The biggest egg still hasn't cracked. Oh, how much longer will it take, I wonder?" And once more she sat down. An old duck passing by asked how things were going, and when Mother Duck told him that one egg just wouldn't crack, he asked to have a look at it. "It's probably a turkey's egg," he said. "I was taken in like that once. If I were you, I'd leave it and go and teach the other babies to swim." Mother Duck thought about this, but she decided to sit just a little longer, as what did a few more days matter? When the egg eventually cracked, out crawled the baby. It was very big and very ugly. "That's an awfully big duckling," thought Mother Duck. It didn't look like the others at all, and she began to wonder if it really was a baby turkey. Well, the only way to find out was to go down to the water, and one by one the little ducklings plopped in. The water went right over their heads, but they soon came up again and started swimming very well. Even the ugly grey baby swam with them. "It's not a turkey," thought Mother Duck, "as it can swim well." So she was sure it was one of her babies. It was really very pretty if you looked at it properly. After a while, Mother Duck decided it was time to introduce her babies to the great world, and after telling them to use their legs, pull themselves together, and stretch out their necks, they set off. Their tour started in the duckyard, where there was an awful noise, as two families were having an argument. Some of the ducks weren't very friendly, and others made rude remarks. "Those are pretty children, Mother Duck, but look at that one there. He's so big and funny," they said. "Leave him alone," said Mother Duck. "He certainly isn't pretty, but he swims well, and I'm sure he'll be all right when he grows up." And she nudged his neck and smoothed out his feathers. "He is a drake," she went on, "so it doesn't matter quite so much." The old duck told them to make themselves at home. As time went on, things got really worse for the ugly duckling, as he was chased, bitten, teased, and even his sisters were horrid to him. So one day he ran away, far, far away from the duckyard, and as he passed bushes and trees, the birds flew up into the air. "That's because I'm so ugly," thought the little duckling, still running on. By night time he had come to a big lake where some wild ducks lived. He was very miserable and very tired, so he settled down at the edge of the lake and went to sleep. Early the next morning, one of the wild ducks flew over to him. "Hello, what sort of chap are you?" he asked. "You're very ugly, but we don't mind as long as you don't marry into our family." Of course, the poor little duckling had never thought of marriage. He just wanted a place to rest. That was not to be, as the next moment there were some loud bangs. It was duck shooting time, and there were men everywhere with their dogs. The little duckling was so frightened he hid his head under his wing. More shots rang out, and into the lake jumped the dogs. Suddenly, close beside the little duckling was a very big dog, with his tongue hanging out and his eyes all shining. He poked his nose right up against the duckling, showed his sharp teeth, and next thing he ran off without grabbing him. "Oh, that was lucky," thought the duckling. "I'm so ugly, even the dog doesn't like to bite me." So he lay quite still until the guns had stopped shooting, and when everything was quiet again, he hurried out of the lake and went rushing across some fields and meadows. Towards night time, he came to a broken-down hut where an old woman lived with her cat and hen. "You're a strange little thing," said the old woman, "but you can stay and lay me some duck eggs." So for 3 weeks the duckling stayed there, but no eggs came, because of course he was a drake. But the cat and hen didn't know this, and they just thought he was silly and not very good at laying eggs. So there he lay in a corner, feeling so miserable that he decided it was time he moved on. By now, autumn was nearly over, and it was becoming much colder. The poor little duckling was miserable and lonely, and one afternoon, as the sun was setting, a whole flock of beautiful birds flew out of the bushes. The duckling had never seen anything so beautiful. They were very white, with long necks, and they gave a most peculiar cry. They were swans. They flew so high, and the little duckling was so excited just watching them that he whirled himself round and round in the water and gave such a loud cry he even frightened himself. As soon as they were out of sight, he dived to the bottom of the lake and back up again. He didn't know what the birds were called, nor was he even jealous of them, as it didn't enter his head to wish he was as lovely. All he wanted was for other ducks to be friendly with him and to find a new home. This wasn't easy, as no one wanted him, and by now it was winter and very cold, with ice on the water and snow everywhere. However, we'll try and forget that winter, as it was all very sad, and no one could have been happier when the sun shone again than the little duckling. The birds were singing in the trees, and the duckling found he could flap his wings strongly, and he could fly far higher. He decided he wanted to fly like those beautiful birds he had seen, and sitting on the water one afternoon, he stretched his neck, and as he looked at his reflection, he couldn't believe what he saw. No longer was he a clumsy, dirty grey bird, ugly and awkward, but a lovely swan. He was so happy he didn't know what to do. He ruffled out his feathers, stretched his slender neck, and cried out joyfully. He just didn't dream, when he was an ugly duckling, that there could ever be such happiness. There was once a little boy named Peter, and he lived in a small cottage near a great forest with his grandfather. Early one morning, Peter opened the garden gate and went into the forest to play with his friends. He had many friends in the forest. There was Robin Redbreast, and Quacky the duck, and Tommy the cat. Soon his grandfather came after him. He was annoyed because Peter had gone into the forest.
"I told you it was a dangerous place,"
he said to Peter when he found him.
"What if a wolf should come along? What would you do then?"
He took Peter by the hand, led him back to the garden, and closed the gate. No sooner had Peter gone than a great hungry wolf did appear in the forest. In a twinkling, Tommy the cat scampered up a tree. Robin Redbreast flew to a branch above the cat, while Quacky the duck, on seeing the wolf, quacked and quacked in her great excitement and started to run. But no matter how hard she ran, Quacky the duck couldn't escape the wolf, and with one great gulp he swallowed her. So this was how things stood. Tommy the cat was on one branch, and Robin Redbreast was on another, not too close to the cat, mind you. And the wolf walked round and round the tree, looking up at both of them with greedy eyes. Peter saw what was happening to his little friends, and as he watched, the wolf paced back and forth. Suddenly, Peter thought of a plan. Not being at all afraid, he went into the house and found a strong rope. Then, when the wolf wasn't looking, Peter climbed up the tree, made a lasso, and carefully lowered it down. In no time at all, he'd caught the wolf by the tail, and he pulled with all his strength. Feeling himself caught, the wolf began to jump wildly and tried to free himself. Peter tied the other end of the rope to the tree, and the wolf, twisting and turning, only made the rope tighter round his tail. In fact, the rope was so tight, the wolf cried out, and while his mouth was open, Quacky the duck jumped out and was free again. Just then, shots were heard. Some hunters, who'd been following the wolf's trail, came out of the forest, shooting as they walked. Peter shouted, "It's all right. I've already caught the wolf. Please help me take him to the zoo." And off they all went. There was Robin the Redbreast, Tommy the cat, Quacky the duck, Peter's grandfather, and the hunters carrying the wolf. Right out in front, though, was Peter, who marched proudly, for he alone had caught the wolf.
Once upon a time, not too long ago, in the small town of Westburn lived 2 fire engines. Their names were Smoky and Sparky, and they lived at the fire station on the main street of the small town. They had been there for many years and were very good at putting out all the fires in their town. They really did a splendid job. Of course, they had been to so many fires they had lost count.
"Putting out fires isn't our only job, though,"
said Smoky. "No, that's right," said Sparky. "Do you remember, Smoky, when we had to rescue that kitten because it was stuck up in that high tree?"
"Oh, yes," said Smoky. "They needed our long ladders that time, didn't they?"
Sparky said, "I get jolly cross, though, when we're called out and there's no fire at all." Smoky agreed with Sparky. Whenever they had a procession in town, the 2 fire engines were always there right out in front, leading the band, the marching girls, the clowns, and all the floats. Smoky said,
"I think the funniest job of all was when we were called to rescue the mayor's big fat toe from the bath tap. Ho, 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 ho!"
Smoky and Sparky had quite a laugh over that. As time went by, the town grew and grew. More people shifted in, and so more houses were built, and more shops too. And this meant more fires to put out. Smoky and Sparky had to work very hard. They were kept so busy they didn't ever have a day off, not even on Sundays. One night the mayor and his councillors had a meeting at the town hall, and after a lot of talking they decided that 2 fire engines weren't enough for their town. Westburn was no longer a small town, and so it was decided to buy a brand new fire engine. All the people in the town helped raise money to pay for the new machine, as it was going to be very expensive. They had stalls where they sold cakes and sweets, toys and lucky dips, and the children held a pet show, while the school held a flower and vegetable show. The day finally came when the new fire engine was delivered. Smoky and Sparky weren't in a hurry to meet their new mate, but before you could say sizzling embers, Fred, the big new fire engine, had arrived. What a day it was! The band was out playing, and everyone in town had come to see the new fire engine drive down the main street. Smoky and Sparky weren't at all happy. Smoky said,
"What a fuss they're all making."
"Yes," said Sparky, "it's just too much." Smoky said,
"You know he's got a longer ladder than we have, and bigger hoses. He can carry more firemen too."
"He's bigger than we are," said Sparky, "and he's even got a louder siren." Poor Smoky and Sparky. All they could do was sit in the back of the fire station, hang their bumper bars, and cry. They couldn't bring themselves to be friendly with the flashy new stranger when he drove in and parked beside them. Actually, Fred was feeling a bit nervous, because although he was newer and bigger than Smokey or Sparky, he had never been to a big fire before, and he thought they must be very brave, for he had heard they had put out so many fires. He wanted to be friendly, and so he started talking. "I say, my name's Fred. Tell me, what's it like when you go to a fire?" Smokey and Sparky ignored him. "Oh, come on. Please tell me," said Fred. Still, Smokey and Sparky ignored him. Suddenly, the fire bells started ringing. The firemen came sliding down the pole and rushed to the engines. The biggest shop in town was on fire. The 3 fire engines with their sirens on were away. Out of the fire station they came, turned left down the main street and drove right to the end. There were people everywhere. The flames were leaping through the roof. The windows were crashing in, and the smoke was thick and black. With the sirens going, the crackling of the fire, and people shouting, it was just so noisy. The firemen pulled out all the hoses and hooked them up. The water was turned on, the ladders were going up when one fireman noticed a man trapped on the 2nd floor. Fortunately, Fred's ladder was long enough for the fireman to reach the man and bring him down safely. In no time at all, the 3 fire engines had put out the biggest fire the town had ever seen. All the people and the other shops on the street were saved. When the 3 fire engines arrived home, Smokey said, "Fred, we're sorry for being so horrid to you. Let's all be friends." A few days later, the 3 friends were very proud and happy when the mayor, at a meeting outside the town hall, pinned a special medal on each of their bumper bars for the fine job they had done the day of the big fire. Little Toot was a tugboat who just couldn't do anything right. It wasn't that he was bad. He was just always getting into trouble. A tugboat's job is to pull the big ships around the harbour, and Little Toot's father Big Toot did this. Tugboats all have a whistle, of course, and this was one thing that was different about Little Toot. His whistle went like this. Toot, toot. But Big Toot's whistle went like this. Ooh! However, Little Toot didn't worry. He went on his way, sailing in and out and around the big ships anchored in the harbour, tooting his little whistle and blowing balls of black smoke out of his black smokestack. First the whistle, toot, toot, then the puff of black smoke. The big tugboats wondered if Little Toot would ever grow up, because all he did was have fun. As I said before, though, he wasn't really bad, and one day when he stopped to watch his father Big Toot, he saw how hard it was pulling the big ships around. So Little Toot decided to help. When he saw his father tugging away with a huge ship on the end of his rope, Little Toot scooted round to the back of the big ship and started to push. Unfortunately, he pushed on the rudder by mistake, and when the rudder turned, so did the big ship turn too. You can imagine what happened then. The big ship was completely out of control. It went round and round in circles and ran right over Big Toot, who went down under the waves and came up full of water, spluttering and gasping for breath. The big ship, still out of control, smashed into the wharves and went right up onto the land, knocking over 2 buildings and stopped in the middle of a street. Fire engines came zooming, and there were people everywhere. Poor Little Toot. He was in real trouble this time, for pushing a big ship up onto the street and through 2 buildings was very serious. The police boats came and took little Toot away out of the harbour and into the big ocean, far out to sea, and left him there all by himself and told him never to come back home. Little Toot's first night away out there was horrible. He was tossed about by the big waves, and he heard awful noises from the lifebuoys and just other sounds in the night. To make it even worse, a storm came up, and little Toot was soaked all the way up right to the top of his smokestack. Waves far bigger than he was crashed over the top of him, and he started coughing and spluttering with all the water. Suddenly, the sky was lit up by a rocket. This was the signal of a big ship in distress. Forgetting how frightened he was, little Toot raced towards the spot where he saw the rocket. A flash of lightning struck, and he was able to see a big ship caught between 2 rocks. Little Toot was sure he'd need help, so as he raced to the spot, he began puffing smoke balls out of his smokestack. This time, he puffed them so as they spelled SOS in smoke in the sky, and anyone seeing that would know someone was in trouble. Sure enough, the other big boats back in the harbour saw the SOS in the sky and knew something was wrong. They tried to get out to help, but the storm was too strong. So little Toot was on his own with no help at all. Instead of going up and down over the big waves as the big ships would, he skimmed across the tops of the waves. When he reached the big ship, the captain threw a long rope to little Toot, and little Toot started to pull. And he did it. The big ship came off the rocks and little Toot headed towards the harbour, still towing the big ship. The other tugboats, who had seen the whole rescue, set off all their whistles, which made a tremendous noise. That was their way of saying, well done, and also a welcome home to little Toot, as he had really proved he could be a big tugboat now. His father, Big Toot, was very proud of him, as little Toot was now a big Toot too. Once there were 5 little puppies who dug a hole under the fence and went for a walk in the big wide world. Through the field they went, along the road, across the bridge, over a patch of green grass, and up the hill, one behind the other. When they got to the top of the hill, they stopped and counted themselves. Oh! 1, oh, oh, 2, oh, 3, oh, oh, 4. Oh, one little puppy was missing. Now just where has that poky little puppy got to? They wondered, for they could see he wasn't on top of the hill with them. They looked down one side of the hill, and the only thing they could see was a big black spider going down. Nor was he coming up the other side, because all they could see was a darting green lizard coming up. When they looked down at the patch of green grass near the bottom of the hill, there he was running round and round, sniffing at the ground with his nose. "What can he be doing?" the 4 little puppies asked one another. So down they went to see. Head over heels, bumble-jumble, helter-skelter, till they came to the patch of green grass. "Whatever do you think you're up to?" the 4 little puppies asked. "I can smell something," said the poky little puppy. So the 4 little puppies began to sniff around, and sure enough they smelled something too. "Bread pudding," they said, and home they went as fast as their little legs would take them. Across the bridge, along the road, through the field and under the fence. Sure enough, there was dinner waiting for them, and bread pudding to finish with. Their mother was very angry with them. "So you're the little puppies who dig holes under fences," she said. "Very well, then. No bread pudding tonight." And she made them go straight off to bed. That poky little puppy, he came home after everyone was sound asleep, and he ate up all the bread pudding and crawled into bed as happy as could be. By the next morning, the hole had been filled in, and a sign had been put up. The sign said, "No one allowed to dig holes under this fence." But you're right. The 5 little puppies took no notice of the sign and dug a hole under the fence again and went for a walk in the big, wide world. Through the field they went, along the road, across the bridge, over a patch of green grass and up the hill, one behind the other. When they got to the top of the hill, they stopped and counted themselves. "Oh, oh! 1, oh! 2, oh, oh! 3, 4. Oh dear, one little puppy was missing. "Now just where has that poky little puppy got to?" they wondered, for they could see he wasn't on top of the hill with them. They looked down one side of the hill, and the only thing they could see was a fuzzy caterpillar going down. Nor was he coming up the other side, because all they could see was a slippery green grass snake coming up. When they looked down at the patch of green grass near the bottom of the hill, there he was, that poky little puppy sitting as still as a statue, with his head on one side and his ears sticking straight up. "What can he be doing?" the 4 little puppies asked one another. So down they went to see, head over heels, bumble-jumble, helter-skelter, till they came to the patch of green grass. "Whatever do you think you're up to?" the 4 little puppies asked. "I can hear something," said the poky little puppy. So the 4 little puppies listened, and sure enough, they could hear something too. "Orange custard!" they cried. "Someone is pouring it into our bowls." And home they went as fast as their little legs would take them, across the bridge, along the road, through the field and under the fence. When they got home, there was dinner waiting for them, and orange custard to finish with. Their mother was very angry with them. "So you're the little puppies who will dig holes under fences," she said. "Very well, then, no orange custard tonight." And she made them go straight off to bed. That poky little puppy, he came home after everyone else was sound asleep, and he ate up all the orange custard and crawled into bed as happy as could be. By the next morning, the hole had been filled in, and another sign had been put up. This sign said, "No one at all allowed to dig holes under this fence." But you're right. The 5 little puppies took no notice of the sign and dug a hole under the fence and went for a walk in the big, wide world. Through the field they went, along the road, across the bridge, over a patch of green grass and up the hill, one behind the other. When they got to the top of the hill, they stopped and counted themselves. "Oh! 1, oh, oh! 2, oh! 3, oh, 4. Oh, no. One little puppy was missing again. "Now just where has that poky little puppy got to?" they wondered, for they could see he wasn't on top of the hill with them. They looked down one side of the hill, and the only thing they could see was a big grasshopper hopping down. Nor was he coming up the other side, because all they could see was a round fat frog coming up. When they looked down at the patch of green grass near the bottom of the hill, there he was, looking very hard at something on the grass in front of him. "What can he be doing?" the 4 little puppies asked one another. So down they went, head over heels, bumble-jumble, helter-skelter, till they came to the patch of green grass. "Whatever do you think you're up to?" the 4 little puppies asked. "I can see something," said the poky little puppy. So the 4 little puppies looked, And sure enough, they could see something too. A juicy red strawberry growing in the grass. "Strawberry pie!" they cried. And home they went as fast as their legs would carry them, across the bridge, along the road, through the field and under the fence. Sure enough, there was dinner waiting for them and strawberry pie to finish with. But their mother said, "All right, I know you're the little puppies who dug that hole under the fence again. Well, because you were naughty, there'll be no strawberry pie for dinner tonight." And she sent them straight off to bed. This time, the 4 little puppies waited until they thought she was asleep. Then quietly they crawled out and filled up the hole. When they had finished, they turned round, and there was their mother right behind them. "Oh, you are good little puppies," she said. "Now you can have some strawberry pie." When the poky little puppy got home, he had to find another hole through the fence. And there he saw his 4 brothers and sisters eating the last of the strawberry pie from their bowls. "Goodness gracious," said his mother. "What a shame you're so poky. The strawberry pie's all finished." That poor little poky puppy had to go off to bed without a single crumb of pie, and he really felt very sorry for himself. The next morning, a new sign had been put up over the fence, and this one said, "No puddings for any puppies who ever dig holes under this fence again." And do you know, those 5 little puppies never dug holes under the fence again.
Once upon a time, there was a miller who left everything he had to his 3 sons. The eldest received the mill. The second son inherited the donkey. But the youngest son got only the cat. The boy thought, "My brothers can share the mill and the donkey and live very well. But what can I do with a cat? He's not even good to eat." To the boy's surprise, the cat spoke to him. "Do not fret, my master. Just give me a bag and a pair of boots, and you will see what I can do." Well, since the cat could talk, the boy thought, perhaps he could do other amazing things. So he gave him a pair of stout boots and a game bag. So Puss in Boots went into a briar patch where the rabbits lived. He put bait in the bag and laid down and played dead. Soon a fat young rabbit took the bait, and Puss in Boots jumped up and caught him and immediately went to the castle and presented it to His Majesty the King. Puss in Boots said, "Sire, I bring a rabbit from my noble lord, the Marquis of Marbas, with his compliments." "Tell your master we are pleased," said the king. Then Puss in Boots hid in the cornfields and snared some partridges. Then he went to the castle and presented them to the king. The king thanked him and presented him with a bag of gold. In this way, for many months, he kept the miller's son from starving. Then one day, Puss in Boots heard that the king and his beautiful daughter would be driving near the river. So he told the miller's son to go to the river and bathe at a spot where the river runs closest to the road. Well, the boy thought it was a silly thing to do. But Puss in Boots had brought him a purse of gold, so he decided to do it. The miller's son was bathing in the river when the king's coach passed by. Suddenly, Puss in Boots jumped onto the road, shouting, "Help! Help! My lord the Marquis of Marbas is drowning!" The king ordered his guards to help the drowning Marquis. All the while, Puss in Boots shouted, "Stop thief! Stop thief!" And he told the king how robbers had stolen his master's coach and clothes. Well, the king sent for one of his finest suits to cover the poor Marquis's body. In the king's clothes, the miller's son really looked like a marquis, and the princess fell madly in love with him. Puss in Boots decided to carry the plot even further. So as his master got into the coach with the king and the princess, Puss ran ahead. When he came to some farmers in a meadow, he said,
"If you don't tell the king that this land belongs to the Marquis of Marbas, it will go badly for you."
When his majesty drove by, the farmers shouted, "To the great Marquis of Marbas!" Then Puss in Boots ran on to a cornfield and shouted,
"If you do not say this corn belongs to the Marquis of Marbas, you will be ground to mincemeat."
Of course, he was only joking, but they were so frightened that when the king drove by, they shouted, "To the great Marquis of Marbas!" The king was amazed at the Marquis's estates, and the miller's son was even more amazed. Puss in Boots ran on ahead to the house of a rich ogre who really owned all the lands. He said to the ogre,
"Tell me, is it true you can change yourself into anything? A lion, perhaps?"
"Of course," said the ogre. "Look!" And the ogre turned into a lion right before his eyes. Puss in Boots leaped onto the roof to keep from being eaten. When the lion had turned back into the ogre, Puss in Boots said,
"Is it true that you can also make yourself into a tiny thing, like a mouse?"
"Simple," boasted the ogre, and suddenly he had turned into a mouse. And before the ogre could move a muscle, Puss in Boots pounced on him and ate the mouse right up. Puss ran out onto the steps of the castle and shouted,
"Welcome to the castle of my lord, the Marquis of Marbas."
Well, the king thought, "My, what a wonderful match for my daughter." And the princess thought, "How lucky the man I love is so handsome and rich." The miller's son thought, "My goodness, he is a clever cat." And Puss, why, when the princess and the miller's son were married, he became the royal cat. And they all lived happily